A very good afternoon. Once again, we are on the track again of our international webinar series on society, economy, polity, and culture, colonial and post-colonial South Asia, organized by the Department of History in collaboration with IQAC, Raidighi College. We are also having our speakers from different corners of the globe. This is the fourth day of this webinar series, and the fourth day webinar series is on Bengal and its frontier. We are having our panel today from our college, particularly the organizing committee, chairman, and the principal of our college, Dr. Shashubindu Jana, organizing secretary, Dr. Shudhin Shina, and also head of the Department of History of Raidighi College, IK coordinator, Dr. Shishi Chatterjee, joint coordinator, Dr. Arunima Bishwas, and she is also head of the Department of Microbiology of our college. Professor Shanat Kumar Purkayat, assistant professor and convener of Academic Council, Raidighi College. We are also having today Professor Ukshana Irani, head of the Department of Food and Nutrition and member of the governing body of our college. Without wasting any time, let us start today's webinar. Two eminent speakers today, Professor Rajshekhar Basu from the University of Calcutta and Dr. Mesbah Kamal, University of Dhaka. They will be delivering their lectures today. First of all, I would like to request Professor Ukshana Irani, head of the Department, Food and Nutrition, Raidighi College, to deliver welcome address. Professor Ukshana Irani.
Many thanks to Professor Shaha. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, yes.
A very good afternoon to everyone. I extend a warm welcome to all the viewers on this virtual platform on behalf of the organizers of this international webinar series on society, economy, polity, culture in colonial and post-colonial South Asia. I think there is some disturbance. I would like to request the organizers to. Okay. Actually, I was not able to hear anything from that side. Okay, I'm starting again. I extend my warm welcome to all the virtual viewers on behalf of the organizers of this international webinar series on society, economy, polity, culture in colonial and post-colonial South Asia. And for that, I would like to congratulate the Department of History of Raidighi College for taking this wonderful initiative and the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Raidighi College for acting as the collaborative body and putting in so much effort for making it a successful one. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge our principal, sir, Dr. Shashubindu Jana, for his relentless support and guidance. He has not been able to join today due to some unavoidable circumstances, but yes, he has sent his warm wishes and regards for all of us. And yes, the most importantly, I would like to welcome The distinguished personalities are resourceful speakers, Dr. Rajshekhar Bosu, Department of History of University of Calcutta, and Dr. Mesbah Kamal, Department of History from University of Dhaka. Today, we all are extremely privileged to have them with us. Their contribution in the field of history, their contribution in the field of academics are well recognized, and as the program will continue, we'll be able to know more about them, their ideologies, their perspective on the very relevant theme of today's discussion. They are the recipients of several awards, several scholarships, and they have many papers in prestigious journals. And really, we are extremely, we feel extremely privileged that we have them today with us. I would like to welcome our Teachers Council Secretary, our very own respectable Dr. Shudhin Sinha. He is the senior most teacher and head of the department, and also a governing body member of Raidighi College. He is also the organizing secretary of this international webinar series. Thanks for his all-time assistance and for providing us with this opportunity to experience such an insightful event. I welcome Dr. Jahan Ali Purkait, the convener of this international webinar series. He is working really hard, working tirelessly for the accomplishment of this academic endeavor. It's really a proud moment for all the teachers of Raidighi College, especially the departmental members, and also the teachers who are extending their technical support. I must acknowledge the presence of Academic Council Secretary, Sri Shanut Kumar Purkait. He is also a GB member, and Joint Academic Council's Secretary, Sri Vidyut Shaha. He is also our host. They have motivated us and supported us from the very beginning of this entire webinar series in various ways. Some of the teachers, they have not yet joined, but I'm sure they will gradually join in. So I'm welcoming them in advance, actually. The IQAC has played a critical, a very significant role in making this webinar series, in enriching this webinar series, actually. So I extend my gratitude to the IQAC coordinator, Dr. Shishir Chatterjee, and joint IQAC coordinator, Dr. Orunima Vishwas. She is also a GB member. And yes, they wanted to be present here today, but they have not been able to make it. But yes, in coming webinar lectures, we are going to hear from them again. And welcome to the lovely audience, the participants, for being with us. Whenever we talk about colonial and post-colonial era, we must understand it actually shaped us. Whatever we are today, it is actually the incidents that happened in past, and that actually shaped our nation. And once upon a time, India was called the golden bird, the golden sparrow, because of its tremendous wealth, prosperity, and enriched heritage. It has been invaded by many outsiders by means of conquest and trade. Our spices attracted them the most. When British came to India, they conquered our local Nawabs and Rajas, and they used our sentiment, that is Atithi Devo Bhava, and they entered into our lives and changed our custom, tried to change our custom, practices, culture, and influenced our society, our policies, our economies. Sacrifices of our freedom fighters gave the country where we all are living at present. The role of Bengal frontiers played an immense and notable role. I salute them all. I salute all the people who fought the fight for our country, for the nation. British colonial rule ended and gave rise to India, Pakistan, and split the Bengal. Our country, India, has always been a very diverse country from the very beginning. And The invaders used it as our weakness. Communal differences, religious differences, differences in caste and creed, they always used it against us. They used a divide and rule policy and always separated us. So let's learn from the history. Let's not repeat the mistakes that we did in our past. Let's past make us better, not bitter. And I think we will have to make our unity our strength. We will have to strive to keep our brotherhood intact, and at least for the sake of harmony and peace. And with that pledge, I think we should proceed further. And for that, I would like to request Professor Bidut Shah to take the charge. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Irani, for your well-thought welcome address. Now, I would like to request Dr. Jahan Ali Purkayet, convener of this international webinar series, to introduce the topic of the day. Please, please, Jahan, unmute yourself. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Bidut Shah. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome once again, all of you, to the International Webinar Series arranged by the Department of History, Raidighi College, University of Calcutta. Revisiting Bengal and its frontiers is the today's theme of the webinar, which would be shared by Dr. Rajsekhar Basu, with his title of talk, exploring the links between Bengal and Burma, and Dr. Misbah Kamal, with the title of his talk is Rohingya issue in Bangladesh perspective. To say about the subject matter of today is that both of the speakers are known to be the historians of history from the below, and they are the message, the main focus which they would highlight in the lecture would be on the state and status of the marginalized community, the minorities, ethnic or religious minorities in the 19th and 20th century. As we see that in case of the relationship of, between Bengal and Burma, that since the 19th century, Bengalis immigration to the Burma and their settlement there in search of employment, and the cultural and economic ties held between the two provinces, the two communities, through the going and coming, the two ports, Calcutta and Rangoon, and the arrival of the Bengali Babus there, and their engagement with the Burmese women in recreation, which created a resentment among the Burmese, and their response and reaction have been taken into accounts by Professor Basu. And after all, that the cultural ties which was made during the time becoming fade and began to tear with the departure of the British rule. But since today, though repeated efforts have been made to revive the relationship, revive the ties, but the result has not yet been positive. As far as the Rohingya is concerned, the Rohingya Rohingyas who have been denied their citizenship by the government of Myanmar, and the Rohingya genocide. After the Rohingya genocide, they have been forced to go out to different neighboring countries, and Bangladesh is one of the most sheltered place where they came. I think that the speakers, Dr. Misbah Kamal, would highlight on the present socio-economic, cultural, as well as religious status of the Rohingyas, and how much human rights are prevailing there, and how much the bilateral relationship between Burma and Myanmar and Bangladesh is in perspective of the issues of Rohingya would be highlighted in his lecture. And at last, I think that one message from the two speakers' topic is that the oppression, deportation, as well as the destruction of the marginalized communities, of the minorities, ethno-religious communities. I would like to mean the Bengali community throughout the region, throughout the world, have been in the light of discussion. And I think it is very important, and the two speakers will justice on this issue, on the subject today we have selected, and we will hear all the respected speakers of international repute today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jahan Ali Purkaid, for introducing the topic of the day. Now, the keynote address of the day is going to be delivered by Professor Rajshekhar Basu, Professor, Department of History, University of Calcutta. I would like to request, beg me pardon, he is also our first speaker today. Now I'd like to request Professor Shobita Soren, Assistant Professor in the Department of Bengali, to introduce our first speaker. Shobita.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now I am going to introduce an honorable guest in front of you, Professor Rajshekhar Basu, teaches in the Department of History, University of Calcutta, a recipient of several international fellowships and visiting scholarships in internationally ranked prestigious institutions like the CEIS, Paris, Heidelberg University, Charles University, University of Marseille, McMaster University, Lund University, La Sapienza, Uppsala University, University of Canterbury, and University of Tartu. He also taught for some time as a full-time faculty in the Center for the Study of Discrimination and Exclusion, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He had also been the IQAC Chair in Contemporary Indian Studies, Michael Romarius University, and was also a guest faculty at the Center for Oriental Studies, Vilnius University. He is the author of Nandana's Children, The Pariah's Trust with Destiny, Tamil Nadu 1850 to 1956, page 2011, Dalit Experiences in Colonial and Post-Colonial India, Rajat 2012, and jointly edited narratives of the excluded past issues in colonial India, KP Bagchi 2008, Voices from the Margin, Aspects of Adivashi History in Colonial India, Primus 2013, Medical Encounters in British India, Oxford University Press 2013. He has contributed more than 40 articles and book chapters in journals and edited books published by Oxford University Press, Orient Black Swan, Monohor Says, Primus Palgrave Macmillan, Cambridge Scholars Publishing, Anthem Press, Shamiksha Press, and Tulika Press. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sharon. Now I would like to request our eminent speaker, and simultaneously Professor Basu will be delivering the keynote address of the day. Now I would like to request Professor Rajshekhar Basu to deliver his lecture. Sir.
Good afternoon. It's an immense pleasure to speak on a Sunday afternoon on an invitation extended on behalf of the Raidighi College for the international webinar which they have been organizing. Now, I take the opportunity of expressing my gratitude to the principal and the members of the organizing body. And at the same time, I also thank my student, Dr. Jahan Ali Purkayat, to be very pursuing so far as his efforts are concerned in forcing me to actually get into this webinar. For the last 2-3 months, I've been very tired, you know, in the sense that there have been several such occasions where I had to speak for long hours, and I had told Jahan that it might not just be possible because of this sort of tiredness, but he wouldn't listen, and he forced me to accept this invitation. And then he came up on the other day. He came up with this entire idea that I had to talk about Bengal, a sort of a keynote on Bengal for about 10-15 minutes. Now, it's an onerous job because all through my tenure, my research tenure, I've been working on South India. Very little I have worked on Bengal. So it was a very, very daunting task for me how to introduce the region, and that too with a very, very esteemed co-panelist and also an extremely good friend of mine, Professor Misbah Kamal from the University of Dhaka. Now, let me try out what I really understand by this entire history of Bengal and how do we look into the region, because Bengal's frontier, I would argue, is an unfinished agenda. This entire idea of a frontier actually came from the frontier thesis that was propagated long time back in the 1890s. The Frederick Jackson Turner in the case of the United States. And the US frontier is also an unfinished story. Some people said that when the US actually conquered Philippines in 1898, that was the last point of the American frontier. But when in 1954-55, the US made it a point that that they would intervene in Indochina or in other parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East, that was also another frontier for the Americans. And when they had a really sort of a confrontation with the European leaders like de Gaulle in the 1960s, with the US intervening in the affairs of Western Europe, that also was a frontier. So how do we define the frontier, which is actually indefinable for that matter? Now, for the first time, the history of Bengal, whenever the discussion of history of Bengal comes in, we could say that much of this idea we can still get from J.C. Marshman's History of Bengal, which had been translated by Pandit Ishachandra Vidyasagar, a companion volume which was published by Ramgoti Nayaratno. There was this companion published by Ramgoti Nayaratno. Then there was another independent work by Bhudev Mukhopadhyay, and then ultimately there was also Ghulam Hussein's Chronicles of Bengal. But there is still a lot of controversy as to what constitutes the region of Bengal. Now, if one reads Mukundaram Chakraborty's Chondi Bengal, it did not fix any geographical boundary, but there was a great deal of emphasis on Dik Bandhana, and this led Mukundaram to talk about major pilgrimage centers. Mukundaram would talk about Nilachal in Orissa, he would talk about Vrindavan, he would talk about Ajodhya, he would talk about Gaya, he would talk about Prayag, he would talk about Dwarka, he would talk about Hastinapur, he would talk about Varanasi. But there is also a reference of major centers like Kalighat to lesser temples and pilgrimage sites like those in Bikrampur, Kharagpur, Teoti, Chandrakona. Early 18th century also went in for Dik Bandhana, but his range was limited because he did not really venture beyond Puri and Vrindavan. There is also inclusion of peers along with Mahamaya or the Jagannath cult. For example, we come across the names of Zafar Khan Ghazi of Tribeni or Saringa Sahib. There is an element of regionalization in terms of these two particular terms, Rad and Bongo. We still have not been able to extricate ourselves from this sort of distinction between Rad and Bongo. The question that comes to mind is whether they are at all relevant when Bengal history is seen in terms of a truncated existence. Now, Bengal, the Bengal that we knew before 1947 is now no more the same. It has been partitioned into West Bengal on the Indian side, and it had been partitioned, and some portions had passed off to Pakistan and was designated as East Pakistan in 1947. And how much this division, how much this sort of partition is relevant in contemporary history is also a matter of debate. Some say that it definitely has a relevance because, after all, you cannot write the history of a separate nation state like Bangladesh, which emerged in 1971 after a bloody confrontation with the Pakistani authorities. You cannot really write a history of Bangladesh if you don't really go to 1947 or even beyond 1947 till up to the 18th century. In fact, though we have meta-narratives on later 19th and 20th century Bengal, Bengal's history undeniably could be a narrative of many micro-histories. It is still not that evident in the writings of Bengali historians, where the strength of local history is not always to be found in the interpretative skills of historians. For instance, Bengal is one of the most heavily researched regions. When you talk of agrarian history, when you talk of social history, and when you see those enormous tomes of historical research volumes which are gathering dust, or people which are being read by people in the libraries. But then there is also a question mark. Have we made full use of those enormous tomes of folk literature, some of which are printed, but mostly they could also have an oral form? And we can say that we have not really done justice to them. They have seldom been recognized as sources by researchers. For example, I'm talking about Shushil De's Proverbs of Bengal, or Agricultural Proverbs of Bengal. Historians have not consulted these sort of texts with that great deal of concentration when it comes to dealing with agrarian history, or when it comes to dealing with agricultural technology in colonial Bengal. There is hardly any reference of Shushil's work. But coming back to the earlier version of regionalization, one must admit that there has always been an element of fluidity in defining the Bengal, the frontiers or the boundaries of Bengal. I would say the boundaries of Bengal. Sometimes it could include regions of Mughalbandi, Odisha, or regions as far as Ganjam, bordering Telugu-speaking tracts. It was for this reason, perhaps, a young lad made it to Calcutta by foot from Ganjam in the early 19th century and regaled the Babus with his singing, a genius who is known to us as Rupchat Pokhi, or even persons like Gopal Ure, for that matter, in early 19th century Bengal. When in the 1960s, the doyen of Bengali historians, N.K. Sinha, who was the leading historian of Bengal in his times, he was laboring to get his epic work, The History of Bengal, published under the aegis of the University of Calcutta. There had been enormous degree of research in Bengal's history writing. Sinha, along with his elite band of students like Binoy Bhushan Chaudhary, had already embarked on a grand mission of economic history. The coming together of great minds like Omiyo Bakshi and Shobhashachi Bhattacharya undoubtedly led straight to this new enterprise. These men helped us to dream in terms of a grand narrative, weighing the past heavily in terms of the fulcrum of economic determinism. But it is doubtful whether every historian working on themes related to Bengal's past in the 1970s and 80s, particularly those researchers who were working in the 1970s and 80s, placed their reliance on the doctrinaire Marxism that was supported by this earlier generation of scholars. It is undeniable that the influence of Eric Hobsbawm, Christopher Hill, and E.P. Thompson was impacting on their minds. There were some who tried to understand the relations between the material and the social, not thinking in terms of binaries, but in terms of convergences and collapses. However, more interesting developments were to follow, and this was to be located in the genre of political history. Bengali historians who were in the forefront of political history research seemed to be rather ambivalent when it came to the acceptance of the idea of national history. Rather, they seemed to premise more on the region, if it seemed to be, even if it seemed to be rather a feat of imagination for them. And many actually could borrow a lot from social theorists like Benedict Anderson in their writings, and this is very much evident from the late 1990s and from the early part of the 20th century. In all these writings, there seemed to be an element of exception. Bhadralok politics, the division between Vaishnava and Shakta traditions in the sphere of political culture, and the emerging radical philosophies, including revolutionary politics, and the influence of communist slogan of class struggle in the agrarian and industrial sectors. Yet it is undeniable that from the early years of the 20th century, there were strong winds blowing in favor of Bengali identity, something which could be related to a fear something which could be related to a fear that was evident that was evident almost a century back or even more. Particularly, this sort of fear had existed since the times of Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay's time, that of being blown apart more in cultural terms by the gale represented by colonial modernity. Many of them, like Bankim, were skeptical of this colonial modernity, and this happens almost a century after Bankim had died in 1891. So it's happening in the early part of the 20th century, and people are getting, and more people are succumbing to this fear, to this idea of colonial modernity. Bankim, for that matter, did not discount the positiveness of colonial modernity, but he did keep the possibilities open for Bengalis to use Bengali in defining their past and using it to face a future that sometimes appeared to be uncertain. Perhaps it was Bankim who instilled in the minds of his fellow citizens that Bengal's history is not to be defined in terms of a narrow geographical scale, but rather as an aspect of a history of mankind. It is this part of Bankim that has influenced social scientists like Chatterjee and Dipesh Chakraborty to define Bengal's encounter with modernity through an intellectual engagement with luminaries like Bankim and Bhudev. This research, now this sort of research might have reached great heights, and it really proved to be irksome for many Indian historians located in regions located in different regions of India. At least they were scattered in various research institutes and universities in regions which were quite far from India. And I still remember in the early 1990s, M.S.S. Pandian, who was my mentor in Madras, would comment that all post-colonial and post-modern studies emanating from the hands of the Bengali Bhadralok was nothing other than references coming in from Bonkin. So he said that much of this post-colonial or postmodern venture that had been that had actually what you may say, this sort of Bengali social theorists I'm talking about, were actually suffering from a disease that is Bonkin mania. And as if you read Bonkin, and it is enough to defy and redefine the contours of Indian nationalism, the tensions between the self and the community, and those of private and public space. Notwithstanding such banter, it has been very difficult for the postmodernists to extricate them fully from the follies of resting their shoulders exclusively on Tagore and Bonkin. I find this in a way a bit hegemonistic, discounting the countless number of narratives presented in the writings of men who were denied the status of Bhadraloks or who were involved in a battle with the Bhadraloks to establish their own counter narratives. The Bhadralokification of history is not simply a project which has seen the involvement of the Marxist and nationalist historians, but also their critics who would come under the umbrella of the subaltern school. Historians of Bengal, despite a section of them claiming to be exponents of new social history, prioritizing more on the marginalized, have still not been fully drawn to the popular. The reticence to look into the practices and beliefs of the lower order leads to a very esoteric narrative, where the agency of the Bhadralok seems to be the normative. Thus, history of Bengal, when you bring in concepts of macro and micro, is still a half-finished experiment, leaving more questions unanswered than those answered. I would like to argue that we have remained in a sort of an ethnocentric sphere, conditioned and influenced by our own notions of Bengaliness, relevant to accept the fact that this feature of our life is part of a construction that has been brought out of the survival instincts of a privileged few. After all, Bengali Bhadraloks are few in number compared to the people who would not qualify as Bhadraloks. So it is the sort of the survival instincts of this privileged few that has actually propelled our intellectual engagement with the past, and it has blurred the prospects that were there with a sort of hegemonization and that of a hegemonized discourse where the upper caste or upper class Bengalis actually speak in terms of a compositeness or a whole, despite their overt or covert resistance to deny the subaltern a place within it. Before I formally begin my presentation, I would also like to make an observation that this Bengaliness, which has an accepted axiomatic reference so far as the Bengali historians are concerned, has left behind an element of negativity. This has often been raised by scholars in the West. This is often seen in terms of their reluctance to comprehend and interpret the interactions that have taken place between Bengal and the adjoining regions represented by Oriya and Assamese-speaking people. In fact, sometimes in course of the 19th century, the euphoria centered over the tongue led to the creation of spatial possibilities, which have been referred to in the researches of Sharupa Gupta, where she interestingly talked of the experiments towards the institutionalization of shamajas. But then there was an element of fluidity, where men belonging to different shamajas could come together. I would also refer to younger generation of social theorists like Bodhisattva Kaur, who in their researches have shown how the smaller history competed with the bigger history, something which was replete with the phenomenon of resistance, collaboration, and outright rejection. Perhaps it is in the light of these researches that I would formally begin my own presentation on Bengal-Burma historical connectivities, which remained very much a part of our own cultural dialogue in both macro and micro histories, if not holding out the picture of a bigger development, which was to be seen in the activities of the Indian revolutionaries in Southeast Asia in the 1920s and 30s, where I think there has been a great deal of intellectual intervention by people like Shapna Bhattacharya, Lipi Ghosh, and Arun Ghosh. But it is also something which has found very little attention from historians, though it is part of the intellectual project of the University of Calcutta. Now, let me talk about the sort of a combined keynote and a sort of an individual presentation. I just move into my individual presentation on Burma. The modern emigration from India, as you know, was entirely a British creation. It began in 1834 when slavery was abolished, when the debate on the abolition of slavery gained ground in London. And by 1840, 41, 42, slavery was weeded out. Labor was needed to work on the sugar plantations in the various British colonies. And without dependable supplies of labor, survival of plantations would be extremely difficult. Consequently, the British colonies followed the practice of the Latin American and Cuban colonies, who were importing Chinese indentured labor from the Portuguese settlement of Macau. Indian laborers had already been found useful in various colonies, where where previously slaves and convicted persons had been employed to work in the public works. But for the Indians, it was mostly jobs in the plantations. Now, in India, and it becomes the first of these big-scale, large-scale migration is evident when a large number of people go to Mauritius in the 1830s to work in the sugar plantations of Mauritius. And thereafter, it has been an unending story of migration to Jamaica, to Trinidad, to Reunion Islands, to South Africa, and also far-off places like Fiji and Suriname. Now, there are a lot of places. I can't really just come out with almost the names of all these small, tiny island nations by now. Now, in India, as Kingsley Davis has pointed out, pressure to emigrate had always been great enough to provide a stream of immigrants much larger than the actual given to move out to new regions in search of opportunities. Large-scale Indian emigration did not take place until the establishment of British imperialism in India, as well as in other parts of the world. Burma, for example, is the case in point, where Indian emigration was numerically insignificant and only seasonal in nature until the annexation of the Irrawaddy Delta and the Northern Territory by the East India Company in 1852. In 1838, there were only 19 Indians in Rangoon. If one looks into the patterns of migration in the case of Burma, Ceylon, and Malaysia, the figures were relatively high in the early 1890s when the laborers migrated to these quote-unquote foreign lands under the Kangani or the Maestri systems of labor to get higher wages. There was a definite decrease in the figures during the First World War years, but after the end of indenture in 1917, there were ample opportunities for, I quote, free or unassisted migration to take place. However, the demand for Indian labor increased due to the rising fortunes of tea, rice, and rubber plantations in Ceylon, Burma, and Malaysia. But in the years between 1926 and 1930, there were a large number of return emigres because of the slump in the plantation sector, which was worsened by the global economic depression. During the Depression and the post-Depression era, until about 1937, more Indians returned home than they left for these countries. The Kangani or Maestri system came to a halt in 1938. By then, not only sufficient labor was available in the colonies, Indian public opinion was also opposed to Indian emigration and ill-treatment abroad. In the years between 1860 and 1940, probably 10 million Indian immigrants moved back and forth between India, Burma, Ceylon, and Malaysia. S. Arasaratnam had pointed out that the majority of the Indian immigrants were Tamil-speaking Hindus, remainder being Muslims, Sikhs, and Christians. Apart from a very large number of laboring people, there were considerable numbers of traders, shopkeepers, entrepreneurs, salesmen, clerks, and professionals. In the case of both Burma and Malaya, the Indian business community comprised mostly of Tamil Chettiars who actually exercised a complete domination over commercial and business establishments in Burma. Interestingly, much before the fear of a Japanese onslaught forced Indians to think of a speedy evacuation from Burma, risking their savings and movable and immovable securities, the Indo-Burmese riot in 1937 led to a dampening of emotions relating to Indian success in Burma. The government of Burma, after going through the riot inquiry report, constituted a commission of inquiry under J. Baxter with the primary motive of getting into the questions related to the impact of Indian immigration in Burma. Baxter, after investigating the issue of Indian immigration with the help of Indian and Burmese assessors, reached the conclusion that Indian nationals entering into Burma had to possess a duly registered Indian passport and they had to obtain a visa from a competent authority under the government of Burma. The Indians born and bred in Burma and who had made Burma their home were entitled to be treated as Burmese domiciles under the new laws and legislations that came into force following the Government of Burma Act 1935. Now, the long history of migration to Burma from India would highlight several other factors. Firstly, they were seen as fluid labor supply. They were cheaper to hire and manage compared to Burmese workers. Their accommodation costs were relatively lower since they could be housed in substandard tenements. By comparison, Burmese workers were relatively immobile, preferring their employments close to their home districts and required individual dwellings. Secondly, the Burmese were primarily agriculturists and were not suited to work for long hours in the mills with very few rest days and holidays. Thirdly, the European firms preferred to deal with the head maestries to hire and manage the workers rather than hire Burmese workers through individual contracts. Moreover, there were also no Burmese maestries who were in a position to make contracts with European firms or finance their own labor gangs. There was a marked preference for male immigrants. The varied occupation of the Indians and the seasonality of employment impacted on the Indian sex ratio in Burma. In fact, there were wide divergences due to occupational and caste class differences. High caste or high class men left their families behind in India since they frequently could travel between the two colonies. As Amarjit Kaur has pointed out, Chittagonians and Orias employed on ships and engine room and docks also left their families behind due to the nature of their occupation. Moreover, the living conditions of urban factory workers, that too in cramped quarters and lack of privacy, discourage workers on short-term contracts for bringing their spouses. Indian birth rates in Burma were thus low, prostitution was rife, and sexually transmitted diseases among Indian workers were also high. But where does Bengal figure in all this? When we seem to be guided by concerns of political economy, with which I started doing my research as early as 1990s. When you think about Burma and Bengal, there is a great deal of emotional cartography that has to be located, and there is much of shared and layered histories which make up the spaces occupied by the Bay of Bengal. Sunil Amrit and Sugata Bose have tried to look into the pre-colonial connections between the South Asian nations and the presence of a cosmopolitan world across the Bay of Bengal that existed before the advent of the colonial regimes. Rajat Kanta Rai emphasized more on the pre-colonial Indian and Chinese chain of trade and finances ranging from Zanzibar to Singapore, which formed a distinct international system that never lost its identity in the larger dominant world system of the West. Ken Chaudhary had argued that Indian Ocean blends imperceptibly into Asia comprising Chinese, Sanskritic, Indian, and Southeast Asian civilizations. In fact, the seas, as the flexible highways, influenced vernacular politics and connections that emanated from these links. The long historical connections between Bengal and Burma were transformed on both sides by the experience of British colonialism. This is demonstrated clearly in the novels, stories, autobiographies, and memoirs written by Bengalis who had traveled and lived in Burma. The hierarchies of fear, desire, and power, which all impacted on the Bengali mind, were structured and experienced in radically different ways. The Second World War and the collapse of the British rule in South and Southeast Asia led to a erasure of these long-standing emotive relationships. Burma was gradually, to go back to history, Burma was gradually annexed to British India through a series of wars, what we know as Anglo-Burmese wars of the 19th century. Burma, which had shared historical ties with India through its Buddhist identity, and the old Arakanese Buddhist tradition faced constant threats by the British regime, which tended to overlook them. However, the sense of Hindu-Buddhist brotherhood prevailed until the late 1930s, when finally this is broken because of the riots between the Indians and the Burmese. The Buddhist Renaissance, inaugurated by Angarika Dharmapala through his Mahabodhi movement in the 1890s, strongly criticized the Muslim rule for the decay of Buddhism in India, but asserted the close ties with Bengal, which was a strong center of Buddhism between the 5th and the 12th centuries. In 1936, Shuliti Kumar Chatterjee, the joiner of Bengali Academia, person who's written so much in his lifetime, he tried to bring out the etymological close commonness between the Burmese and the Indian languages, interpreting these trajectories in terms of the shared Buddhist past. Chattopadhyay called the Burmese distant cousins and referred to a number of old Sanskrit and Pali names of various regions in Burma. In the years when a section of the Bengali Academia was being gradually drawn towards this entire debate on Brihat Bharatvarsha or Greater India, Chattopadhyay felt that Burma was tied to India through the greater Indic Dharmarajya, a kingdom of shared religious roots. But all was not common between Bengal and Burma as it was visualized. In fact, there were differences in physical features and the economic and social structure, and the differences in the economic and social structure were quite in evidence. Burma had lesser number of landed elite, and it was a reasonably prosperous society, and the literacy figures were believed to be quite high compared to Bengal. There was a small section of the Burmese middle class who shared a love for Calcutta because of its famed educational institutions like Presidency College, University of Calcutta, and the Calcutta Medical College. The monk U. Uttama, who opposed the separation of Burma from British India in the 1930s, was associated with the Bengal National College and had studied in Calcutta for 3 years before traveling around India. By 1911, more than 1 lakh people had arrived in Burma from India every year by steamship from various eastern ports, doing everything from rickshaw pulling to working in docks and rice mills and trading in rice and other commodities, working in railways and customs offices, and financing the developments, the rice paddy cultivation throughout the Irrawaddy River Delta. The Indians were in a majority in the largest cities, in the largest cities of Burma. For example, Rangoon, which is nowadays known as Yangon, Akiab, which is now known as Sitwa, Basid, which is known as Pathen, and Molmen. For the vast majority of the Indians, Burma was a Shwarnabhumi, a space of infinite possibilities. Shuniti Kumar Chattopadhyay, whom I was alluding before, had used the term Shwarnabhumi for South Burma from ancient Sanskrit texts. A poem written by an obscure Odia poet from Calcutta in 1918 gives ample evidence that Burma was a land where people could become extremely wealthy, and that too within a very short period of time. Now, Sharachandra Chattopadhyay's novel Srikanto which is the story of a Bengali Brahmin boy, educated Bengali Brahmin boy, but unemployed, and who is living in a hand-to-mouth situation, finally decides to try his luck in Burma. Burma is a land where streets are paved with gold. Even the sort of idea is there, paved with gold, and where Bengalis are in great premium because they are so much in demand that they are lifted bodily from the ships and they are carried over to their places of employment, whether these shops or establishments are owned by the Burmese or the Europeans. Now, Amitabh Ghosh's historical novel, The Glass Palace, deconstructs and celebrates this trope. Rajkumar, a major character, is lured into Burma in the 1880s by a labor contractor who assures him that no one ever starves in Burma. Ghosh's interesting narrative shows how the British capitalism acted as a disciplining force and, buttressed by superior technology, transformed the ancient Burmese culture and traditions. The idea of Burma as a land of infinite possibilities was also demonstrated by the fact that from the 1920s, Burma became a center of radical politics because of the involvement of the Bengali revolutionaries. The import of printed materials from Bengal to Burma came under strict surveillance by the British intelligence. The author of the Rangoon Mail, a Bengali, Nipen Banerjee, was deported in 1927. The same year, Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's Pather Dabi was prescribed. Revolutionaries like Bhupen Datta were deported to Mandalay jail, where he came into contact with Trailokya Chakraborty and Harikumar Chakraborty, as well as Subhash Bose, who was jailed there in 1925. Datta's Biplober Padachitta narrates in details the contacts of the Bengali revolutionaries with the Burmese. Even Mahatma Gandhi, during his visit to Burma, and that too in Rangoon in 1929, reminded the crowd of Tilak's imprisonment in the Mandalay jail. In fact, like the Andamans, Burma was very much was very much significant for Indians as a place of incarceration, where the nationalists, including Tilak and Bipin Pal, had been jailed. By the late 1930s, the extensive presence of the Indians in Burma predictably created a widespread Burmese frustration and popular bitterness, something which was perceived as economic, cultural, and political domination of the Bengalis over the Burmese race. There were widespread riots, as I was alluding before. This was directed against the Chettiar moneylenders, and historians like Hugh Tinker have argued that the Burmese used the term Kala, derived from the Indian languages, to mean the dark-complexioned Indians who were responsible for their sufferings. Suniti Kumar Chattopadhyay, during his visit in 1936, was quite aware of these antagonisms that were prevailing within the Burmese and the Bengalis. And he advised the Bengalis to accept Burmese nationality. There is, I quote, "There is nothing to fear about this. They would get closer to the Burmese," unquote. But he was against the changing of names and favored the retention of the mother tongue, though he was sensitive to the complexities of living in a different culture. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi said that Burma was never a part of Bharatvarsha. He differed with others. Tagore made 3 visits to Burma, 1916, 1924, and 1927, and he was very critical of the double colonialism of the British and the Indians, which had transformed Rangoon into the most unpleasant form of Vanijya Lokhi. So Tagore was actually looking out for culture, but instead what he saw in Rangoon was the worship of money and jewelry. Other than the Shudagan temple, Tagore did not find anything in the city that was distinctively Burmese. To him, it was a grotesque hybrid culture. Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay and Rabindranath Tagore, the 2 doyens of Bengali literature, nevertheless wrote very fascinating and ambivalent stories about Burma. But there were also memoirs, autobiographies, and reminiscences. The coming together of different was possible, ignoring the lens of the colonial civilizing mission. Sharachandra Chattopadhyay's narratives presented a complex and politicized version of the fate of Indians in Burma. His views are to be found in two novels, Srikanto and Potendari, and a short story Chobi, a tale of two love, Bashwe and Bauthoe, their misunderstandings and union. His depictions were based on his experiences in Burma, where he worked for several years, some part of which saw his involvement as a government clerk. His understanding of women, as revealed through his characters, represented the freedom of women from the thrall of caste and custom, breaking the taboos that had existed in India. After all, the situation, the ambience in Burma was far more free than what it existed in India. This is revealed in the character of Alha, who is believed to have been living with another man when deserted by her husband, who had been attracted to a Burmese lover. Chattopadhyay represents the freedom of women by talking about the free life of males and females in Burma. Sharachandra's depiction matches with the views of Gandhi, who, after visiting Burma in the early years of the 20th century, had eloquently described the costumes and hairstyles of the Burmese women, though he was critical of the laxity of the menfolk. Rameshwari Nehru did visit Burma later and published an ethnographic account of Burmese women in the Stree Dorpun, a women's magazine, where she highlighted the economic independence and social emancipation in regard to the Burmese women, something which Shobna Nidhavan has seen as a sign of civilization. However, these depictions were too often imageries which actually hid the real life experiences. In fact, there are portions in Sharachandra's Srikanto which provide a sort of glimpse into the licentiousness of the Bengali Bhadralok males when it came to defining their social relations with the Burmese women. This is revealed in the statement of a young Bengali man who had been living with a devoted, humble Burmese woman. His decision to return to India was the cause of extreme grief for his Burmese lover. However, the Burmese man, when asked by Srikanto whether his decision to leave Burma permanently would put the woman in a grievous state of affairs, in a grievous state, observed, I quote, grieved. Burmese women are filthy prostitutes with no caste. This one will hook another man before the ship sails from the harbor. This slut eats nepi, a pickle from decomposed fish called guampi, and the stink. It is unbearable. There are nothing like our women, sir. Unquote. There is also a reference in Sharachandra Chattopadhyay how a man masquerades as one immersed in grief and falsely pretends to his Burmese lover that he would return from Calcutta at the earliest. He discloses his real plans in Bengali, which could not be comprehended by the Bengali girl. And I quote, the girl hid her face in the end of her sari and wept inconsolably. The man wailed in Burmese mixed with vulgarized Bengali. Of course, I am not going for a month. I am never coming back. Oh my jewel, I am giving you up I'm giving you up the finger. I have taken your 500 rupees, everything you had. I tried to sell your house, but I couldn't make that make that selling. Unquote. But this beauty and elegance of the Burmese women is only one act of masqueradance because it hides the impulsive and the unfeminine characteristics of the Burmese women. The same gentle, beautiful women, as Sharat Babu had described, were involved in violent acts such as beating up of poor rickshawalas. Many Indian men who had lived with Burmese women despised them because of their loose morals, which was the hallmark of Burmese society. As Tarangi says in his poem, Burmese women are full of all manner of seductive tricks. They make you fall for them and they loot everything you own. Unquote. Thus, the independence and emancipation available to women in Burma are also a sort of a smokescreen which hide the aggression, the breakdown of marital relations, and the sort of avarice that is there within the male perpetrators of violence. this is not just Burma that literary was present before the reading public. There is the other side of the story as well. But to cut the discussion short on this, we find that we find that both the British and the Indian capitalists in Burma were responsible for the sort of social breakdown in Burma in the early part of the 20th century, and that this sort of oppression by both the British and the Indian capitalists was endorsed by British and Anglo-Indian bureaucrats. And this is very much there in the writings of Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay. Sharat Chandra also condemned the deep-rooted custom of religion, law, and social structure, and the cowardice of the native Indians. As Devilina Ghosh has argued that in Pathet Dabi, masquerade and disguise are ways of dealing with colonialism, and as such, strategies are peculiarly possible within the heterotopia of Burma. Its curious innocence and everything is allowed even though there is a sort of an ambience where the sort of revolutionary zeal seems to be protected. The historian Tant Minh Tu, visiting Calcutta in the early years of the 21st century, commented that Calcutta was very much like Rangoon. The downtown in Calcutta, built during the Raj, resembled downtown Rangoon. There were numerous hawkers vending their stuff, from single cigarettes to lungis, like the ones in Rangoons. There were potholes, the English and the squiggy local alphabet. Calcutta was clearly the mothership model on which downtown Rangoon was based. But he lamented that Calcutta path was not taken by Rangoon, though there were strong educational links revolving around the University of Calcutta. But there was hardly any place for Burma in the emerging narrative of India's self-proclaimed status as global power. The ties that bound Calcutta and Rangoon have been decimated through the relentless pursuits in the name of decolonization and that of the breakdown of the British Empire. Before I conclude, let me talk about the early 1940s, when the clouds of war gathered over Southeast Asia and later traversed to South Asia. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's official powers, which have been official papers which have been released by the U.S. State Department, brings to our notice that Burma's connection with India was still important, because apart from the Dutch East Indies and Iran, a significant part of India's petroleum demands were met by Burma. However, there was an apprehension that the closure of the port of Rangoon, apart from the cutting off of oil supplies to India from Burma, would put India into a very difficult situation, which was which by now was becoming heavily dependent on the United States for petroleum supplies. In fact, these statements take us to a different narrative centering around the dependence of India on the Burmese oil refineries, namely those of the Indo-Burma Petroleum Company, which had their refineries in Sulkin, in Pantha, in Thibaba, in Sirian, and Yanbo 1. All of which had some connections with the oil fields in Digboy, maintained under the banner of the Assam Oil Company. But I'm more concerned with the other stories. These are set in the backdrop of trainloads of refugees arriving in Calcutta from the railheads at Dimapur, South Tirap, and Margarita in 1945, right from 1942 to 1945, which were filled with men, women, and children. They had all escaped from the Japanese, trudging miles out of Burma, reaching towns of Assam physically and mentally drained. They were not only Indians, but British and Anglo-Indian evacuees. At Shialda station, they were exposed to thousands of men, noises of steam engines, bells, and myriad voices of hawkers selling a variety of wares. They were high-ranking British officials who made their way with poor Indian laborers to Bowbaja Street, where they were given temporary residence. Perhaps it was not the best of times in their lives, and it was only a moment of sharing stories of agony and displacement. But those who made it to Calcutta were detained, were destined for a new life, compared to the 10,000 evacuees who had died in the jungles of Burma before they reached the Indian border, British Indian border. In fact, the majority of the Indian evacuees were made up of men who were engaged as menials, porters, coolies, chaprasis, chowkidars, sweepers, peons, paniwalas, khalasis, cultivators, and the like. They had been the foundations of the colonial regime in Burma, and they had no wish to strengthen the imperial regime in India. Anonymity seemed to be the best defense against the exploitation. The majority of them were illiterate. They left no records or wrote no letters. Very little is known about their experiences of returning to India, but certainly they were very, very hostile with the British Raj. But certainly, when Amitabh Ghosh began writing about these developments, information to some extent was made available. Dr. Krishnan Gurumurthy was an evacuee, a boy of 9 in 1943-45, when he arrived with his father in Calcutta. It took 10 days for him to travel from Calcutta to Madras by train. And to actually quote from Gurumurthy's own observations, at every major station, people from villages flocked to the train and showered us with delicacies, fruits, and beverages. The affection shown to us by Bengalis, Orias, and Andhras en route was touching. At that time, the fervor of patriotism and freedom from British rule was such that everyone was vying with each other to do their bit for their fellow men. But this feeling of joy is only one side of the story. There were thousands who realized that their husbands, sons, and fathers had arrived home empty-handed. These were the men who had borne loneliness, lived in squalid hovels, and withstood hostility and disdain for little reward. Furthermore, they had to endure the indignities of having to trek out of Burma. In fact, it was a totally different experience for the wealthy Indians. Some of them had their families in Calcutta. For example, the Sinhas owned the largest factory in Burma. There were men like R.K. Pal, Malakars, and Chaudhuris who operated substantial networks of inland waterways transportation. There were also wealthy Bengalis who had been able to transfer their profits, which they had earned as property developers, entrepreneurs, merchants, and financiers. Abdul Bari Chaudhuri was perhaps the wealthiest of them, and he merged his Bengal Burma Steam Navigation Company with the Scindia Steam Navigation Company to form a vast conglomerate. But there were others, namely the middle-class Europeans and Anglo-Burmese refugees who were unable to afford their hotel prices and rented rooms in the Roman Catholic convents and charitable institutions because it was so expensive. They were much better than the majority of the Indian evacuees who had failed to come up with any housing in Calcutta. Ian de Mello, born into a Eurasian family, was evacuated by boat to Calcutta. Initially, they passed from one refugee camp to another, first to Ranchi, then to Jhansi, and finally to Chunar on the river Ganges between Benares and Allahabad, where they lived till the end of the war. Calcutta was also a place where the middle-class British exiles found a place. They were lawyers, they had been administrators, they had been engineers, they had been ship captains, they had been teachers, they had been doctors, they had been businessmen and like. All of them had lost their livelihood and sources of income, although most of them had plenty of money in the bank at home. They could not get their hands on it because the money in the Burmese bank accounts was frozen. The banks in Calcutta were in a precarious state, very uncertain about their business and stability because the eastern arm of the British Empire had been lost because of the Japanese invasion. On March 5th, as early as March 5th, 1942, senior bank officials met in Calcutta to discuss whether they should move to safer locations in India. The meeting was inconclusive. However, the situation improved sufficiently by mid-1943 for the Burma Bank's Reconstruction Committee to open its office in Calcutta. The other managers remained jittery. Several senior bankers like Sir Arthur Morse, chairman of the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, argued that exchange banks should stay together in Calcutta. Others favored moving well away from the frontier. Sir Robert Barnes, general manager of HSBC and Rangoon, toyed with the idea of moving his branch to Shimla so that he could be near to the Burmese, to the Burma government and the Rangoon Corporation. He calculated that that it would put the HSBC in a privileged position in the event of a return to Burma. Shimla also happened to be a much safer and cooler place than Calcutta. Accordingly, in May 1942, the HSBC staff, records, and securities were all moved lock, stock, and barrel to Shimla. The British evacuees at the top of the social pyramid had also much to lose, and the farthest of all, they had lost their status, self-respect, beautiful homes, exquisite possessions, businesses, and industries. And in many people's eyes, they were responsible for losing a crown colony. At the same time, they suffered from the personal grief and anxiety that affected everyone at that time. Interestingly, few Indians would return to Burma after the war had ended. The Europeans were also in a confusion as to whether they should return to Burma. They were not. A few of them returned, but they met with resilience on the part of the local subalterns, and they were made to feel that they were unwelcome guests in Burma. It was in the fitness of things that Burmese political leaders had tasted power, and they would have little to do with the children of an unwanted empire. But as a historian, why should I narrate these stories? It is because that they help us in unraveling the raptures, the ambiguities, and uncertainties that have dawned the relationship between the Ganga and the Irrawaddy deltas across the Bay of Bengal. I would be inclined to argue that they reveal the possibilities and limits of transnational connections, complex and conflict-ridden, entwined and transformative, and reflective of one another. But it is also time to look beyond the webs of ruptures and dissensions and to see whether a reconciliation with the Bengal frontier is possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your informative lecture. And it reminds me the tale of Canterbury Tales by Chaucer. The demographical and the topographical picture you have tried to paint by your words definitely will be giving opportunity for our scholars and the listeners, the young academicians who will try to explore new ideas. Thank you once again, sir. As there is a time constraint, we are not taking any questions from our listeners. Now, I'd like to request Shobita Shoren, once again, Professor Shobita Shoren, Assistant Professor from the Department of Bengali, Raidighi College, to introduce our second speaker today. Our second speaker is Dr. Misbah Kamal from the University of Dhaka. Now, I'd like to once again.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now I am going to introduce an honorable guest in front of you. Dr. Misbah Kamal is professor in the Department of History, University of Dhaka. He is a historian of international repute and director of People's History Research Center, Bangladesh. He acted as technocrat member and coordinator parliamentary caucus on indigenous people and chairperson Research and Development Collective. He holds the position of the General Secretary, Bangladesh Itihash Sammilani, and honored member of the Expert Committee, Bharat Bangladesh Maitri Uddan. In home and abroad, he is associated with different research associations and institutions. He was awarded the Acharya Dinesh Chandra Sen Gold Medal for Research in People's History in 2016, Kolkata. More than 25 books and 25 articles are credited to him as a project director or team leader, funded by both the government and non-government sectors. Dr. Kamal conducted about 50 research work. Thank you so much.
So should I begin? I hope you can hear me.
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. I would like to thank Raidighi College and Professor Rajshekhar Boshu for referring me, and Dr. Jahanali Purkait for inviting me for this talk. And it was very nice to listen to Professor Rajshekhar Boshu, and many of the things that he has been saying actually helps me to convey my messages to you um, in an easier way. However, today I intend to speak on Rohingya refugees, the Bangladesh perspective. And I have decided to say, do it in two parts. Principally, well, initially I'll have an introduction, and I will introduce the situation of the Rohingyas in Bangladesh that most of you know, of course. All of you know, perhaps. But I'll try to narrate that very briefly. Then I will focus on the history of the Rohingya peoples. Then that will take me to the historic linkages between Bangladesh and Myanmar, particularly the Chittagong belt and the Arakan area of Myanmar. And secondly, I will discuss, I'll reflect on the current situation. And the current situation will also be split into two parts. How the stateless Rohingyas are now, that will be one area of discussion. The other area will be the impact of, the Rohingya situation on local community. And I will also look that in two parts, impact on the local community where the camps are, which is principally Bengali, along with some indigenous communities. But also I will try to explore the impact of the Rohingya, Rohingya population, Rohingya refugee situation on the neighboring Chittagong hill tract, so which is the principal hub of the indigenous people in Bangladesh. So how it is affecting the indigenous people's life, that I will also try to convey to you. And of course, in the conclusion, I will focus on the repatriation situation. And this is roughly the structure of my presentation today. So if I begin my presentation, I would like to say that following Professor William Van Schandel, I would like to say that the Myanmar-Bangladesh border is one of the most marginal places of the world. And Professor William Van Schandel says that borderlands are generally marginal places. And Myanmar-Bangladesh borderland has been very marginal because this was quite an unimportant border. Because Myanmar has borders, a much longer border with Thailand, and so that is to them the Myanmar-Thailand border is more important. And for Bangladesh also, as Bangladesh has a very long border with India, so for them the Bangladesh-India border is much more important. So from both ends, the border between Myanmar and Bangladesh was quite unimportant. But this unimportant border suddenly came to the world headlines in 2017 August 2017, as you know, um, um, suddenly came into focus because of the refugee influx from Myanmar to Bangladesh. And the Rohingya crisis, um, the situation which compelled them to cross over to Bangladesh, daring the seas at times and the land border, um, it was simply genocide. The Canadian legislators unanimously opined that what has happened in 2017 in Myanmar, that was simply genocide, and Holocaust Museum in Germany also termed it as genocide. Bishop Desmond Tutu and our revered Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen has called it a slow burning genocide because this has been going on. And French President Macron called it industrial scale ethnic cleansing. And UN fact-finding mission on Myanmar called it crimes against humanity. So from the coinage of these words from around the world, we can understand how the situation was, and naturally the brunt of this was borne by the Rohingyas. So if we use the more recent UN phrase, we can call it atrocity crimes. Atrocity crimes incorporates three things: genocide, crimes against humanity, including ethnic cleansing, and war crimes, including rape and arson attacks. So all these were there in Myanmar, and from Bangladesh, from Bangladesh borders, we could see it with our bare eyes, burned villages. And of course, there have been, images, satellite images showing the whole region on fire. So this was actually a well thought out and planned attack on the Rohingyas. And this was done on the plea that, some of the Rohingya militants attacked some of their border camps. How far that was true is debatable, but even if that was the case, the use of force by the military junta of Myanmar has been extremely disproportionate. And that has led to the world's most severe refugee emergency in recent days. And in fact, more than 1 million refugees now live in Bangladesh. Because I'm having to speak from such a long distance and I'm not that expert in managing my computer, I can't show you the satellite imagery of mass destruction in the Rakhine state, but the satellite imagery that I have in front of me, it shows that over 210 villages were completely destroyed. And from the satellite, it is all marked as red. Those are burning villages and have been counted at 210 burning villages, have been estimated. And this was not the first time satellite satellite imagery of arson attack is also available from October to December 2016, and some also from before that. Yeah. So we can understand, and also, from satellite images, we have got a picture of violence affected sites in 2012 as well. So this has been going on. In fact, Bangladesh has been facing it from soon after the independence, because when Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the founding father of Bangladesh, served as Prime Minister for a small period of 3.5 years, during that time, it was, these problems surfaced. And one of our civil servants recently wrote that when he was the SDO of Coxbazar subdivision, how he had to, under instruction from Prime Minister Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, how he had to, arrange shelter for the Rohingyas, refugees, in that time, in the first half of 1970, in the first half of the 1970s. So, this problem goes back to that. In fact, it started from 1962, and it has gone through several phases. And but the major influx came in 1978, and then another major wave was in early 1990s, 91, and then again in 2012. There was one in 2007, perhaps, then 2012, and subsequently 2016, but the most massive one was in 2017. This problem has been Bangladesh has been trying to repatriate them from 1978 onwards. And so there has been failed repatriation attempts since 1978 and repeated influxes ever since. So that has been the story briefly. So and if I can quickly tell you about the situation which compelled the Rohingyas to flee their own state and cross the border to Bangladesh. I can tell you from the direct interactions that our team had with the Rohingya refugees immediately after they came. So our teams actually visited the camps, stayed there for quite some time. Our teams visited them at several times, and we still have the contacts. But immediately when they came, our team visited them. The first phase was a visit to Shahpuri Deep in Teknaf Upazila, and the second phase we visited the Kutupalong camp, which is now officially regarded as the largest refugee camp in the world. And so our team visited Kutupalong camp and also visited Balukhali camp and Palongkhali camps. These are Rohingya refugee camps. And at the initial stage, we interviewed 14 Rohingya men, 14 Rohingya women, also visited or interviewed 4 boys and 4 girls. A total of 36 interviews were taken. And of the 14 men that our team interviewed, 4 were injured themselves, and one of the injured had a leg amputated, one had a bullet wound, one was splinter hit, and one had a chopped shoulder. Of the 14, 4 were such. Of the 14 women that we interviewed, one aged 21 was gang raped, one aged 45 plus got her hand broken as the army assaulted her with the gun. This was the case with 2 ladies. Of the 4 boys that our team interviewed, 1 boy witnessed killing, and that had severely affected him. And of the 4 girls that our team interviewed, 1 aged 7 or 8 got lower part of her body burnt as she, along with a brother, survived a bomb attack on their house while they were asleep. And that bomb attack actually left 7 of her siblings dead. And her parents survived to mourn the death of 7 children. So we interviewed that unfortunate girl. And other 3 girls that we interviewed, our team interviewed, one was aged 11, other 12, and another 13. And all 3 of them were gang raped. And one aged 13 stated that she was raped by 8 members of Burmese army. And many in the camps appeared traumatized. Of course, the victims, but it was very difficult to determine who was a victim, direct victim, and who was not. And it was whispered in the camps that there was hardly any family who has been able to escape rape, either in their own family or among relatives. But social stigma is restraining most of them from acknowledging it publicly or even in seeking health support. Many have witnessed mass slaughter, and there has been, very unfortunately, when they crossed over the border, the state of Bangladesh was busy in, organizing, first of all, their food and shelter for them. This massive population that they initially, within a few days, the number came was more than 700,000. So it was a huge task for Bangladesh. So the government virtually didn't have time to mobilize any trauma support. So the victims, the whole community was a victim. They needed trauma support, and there was no trauma support system. That couldn't be done. However, the policy, now why all these atrocities? These atrocities emanated from a policy of expulsion, a policy of expulsion of the Rohingyas by the state of Myanmar. This has been going on, and owing to this policy of expulsion of the state of Myanmar, the figures roughly stands at, this has been a map drawn by Al Jazeera television, and they estimated that this was from October 14, 2017. And they based this estimate on, from various sources. They got the figures from UNHCR, IOM, and several other aid agencies. And they estimated that by October 2017, Saudi Arabia was housing 200,000 Rohingyas. UAE was housing 10,000 Rohingyas. Pakistan by then had 350,000 Rohingyas. India gave shelter to 40,000 Rohingyas. And Thailand gave shelter to 5,000. Malaysia gave to 150,000 Rohingyas. Indonesia gave shelter to 1,000 Rohingyas. And Bangladesh, the estimate was then that Bangladesh was housing more than 1 million. So Rohingya is not a very big community. It roughly, the figure ranges between 2 to 2.5 million. So of these, so many were actually by then expelled. So how many were left in Myanmar? It was estimated that towards the end of 2017, only between 500,000 to 700,000 Rohingyas out of a total of maximum 2.5 million, nearly 500,000 or a little more than that, were actually still then were able to stay inside Myanmar, of course risking their lives. But most of them, almost 3/4 of them, have by that time been expelled by the military government in Myanmar. And of the 500 to 700,000 Rohingyas that were there inside Myanmar by that time, of them about 120,000 Rohingyas were living as IDPs, internally displaced persons within the Rakhine state. So you can understand the situation of the Rohingyas. They have been, rightly said, the most persecuted people in recent times. Now, why this persecution? This is simply because of the non-recognition. It was initially a non-recognition of diversity as state policy, but subsequently, that led to, but this non-recognition of diversity as state policy, that led to eternal conflict in Myanmar. And at one stage, the military junta had to come to some kind of compromise with main ethnic groups of Myanmar, and they recognized 8 ethnic groups or eight ethnic communities living in the border areas of Myanmar, borders all around. And as a result, this, so the non-recognition policy of the state turned into a partial recognition, because there were still others who were not recognized. And the majority, or the major one among them, has been the Rohingyas, who still remains unrecognized. But though they had citizenship at the initial stage of the independent Burmese state, their citizenship was taken away by a new citizenship law in 1982. So as a result, so they were citizens of that state from 1948, when Burma came into existence as an independent state. And they had that till 1982, but through a new citizenship law, their citizenship was abrogated, and they became virtually stateless within their own state. So that situation, and with that policy shift, the state became more violent, and subsequently we see the increased attacks on the Rakhines. So, So the Myanmar's policy framework for national integration has been a policy of national integration excluding the Muslims. And this exclusion of Muslims emanated from ultra-Burma nationalism. Their majority ethnicity is called Burman, and from there their nationalism is called Burma nationalism or Burman nationalism. And this ultra-Burma nationalism who are principally believers of aggressive Theravada Buddhism. So the combination of ultra-Burma nationalism and aggressive Theravada Buddhism has led to a policy of national integration, excluding the Muslims, basically. And that has been the policy framework, the revised policy framework of national integration. So that has created the problem. But this was not the case when the state of Myanmar was founded. When the state of Myanmar was founded and there was an interim Burmese government led by Aung San, he envisioned the problems of, ultra-Burman supremacy or ultra-Burman nationalism. And he wanted to accommodate in the Federal Union of Burma. And Aung San wanted to recognize the rights of the other minor ethnicities. And that's why he invited them for a conference, and that was held in a place called Penglong. And the agreement there, Aung San, the father of Aung San Suu Kyi, the agreement that he reached to was called the Penglong Agreement. And this agreement was signed on behalf of the indigenous populations by the San, by the Kachin, and the Chin peoples. And it was signed on February 12, 1947, and that was, hailed as the Union Day. So that was supposed to be the foundation of a union, or that was supposed to be the foundation of a federal union of Burma. And this day is still, observed in Myanmar. But the military government from 1962 has actually gradually shifted from this unionist policy and has had actually this Burman-led military government, successive governments had actually had a anti-Burman or rather had anti-other policies. They othered the other other communities, many of them indigenous, in Myanmar, and they did not abrogate the Union Day, but they actually abrogated the unionist policy, and they became autocratic in terms of their relationship with the others, or a policy of denial began to be followed. In fact, Aung San, he actually envisioned that citizens of the frontier areas. This is also very interesting. If you look at the map of Myanmar, you will find that the Burma people actually live at the center of Myanmar, covering majority area of Myanmar's map. But in all sides of the border, there are smaller minorities. So Aung San actually envisioned that citizens of frontier areas shall enjoy rights and privileges which are regarded as fundamental in democratic countries. I'm quoting from him what he said. So his vision was that, the citizens the citizenship rights of all, including those of the people living in the frontier areas, different peoples, other peoples living in the frontier areas, non-Burman people living in the frontier areas, would be similar. And he had the Western countries in his mind where the people is said to be, enjoying equal rights. So he said that um, in Myanmar they would also enjoy the similar rights. But this was not followed after the killing of Aung San. However, so this has been the story, and their citizenship law, first citizenship law was introduced in 1948, which definitely included all, including the Rohingyas as citizens. But in citizenship law 1982 recognized 8 ethnicities. They gave them full citizenship, but they actually named it 135 ethnicities. But in a closer scrutiny, you will find that those are actually subgroups of those major 8 ethnicities. So to deceive the world, they numbered them as 135, but basically recognized 8 ethnicities. They gave them full citizenship, but others were denied. And through another stroke of proclamation in 1989, they introduced a national registration card, and then that was again replaced subsequently by citizenship scrutiny cards, and that actually made Rohingyas stateless. Then again in 1995, they introduced temporary residency cards. And then again in 2014, they introduced citizenship verification process and began to give national verification cards. And so in this way, gradually, they actually excluded the Rohingyas. Now, who are these Rohingyas? Rohingyas why this vengeance against them? So to answer who are the Rohingyas, there are 2 theories. Well, the first theory says that Rohingyas are a mixed group of people, descendants of Moorish, Arab, and Persian traders, including Mughal, Turk, Pathan, and Bengali soldiers, come migrants, who came at different times of history in Myanmar, particularly in this state of Rakhine, so they are a mixed group of people. Rohingyas are a mixed group of people. This is one theory, and it is stated that they arrived in the area where they live between 9th and 15th centuries. They married local women and settled in the region. The other theory says that Rohingyas are Bengalis. And the senior General Min Aung Hlaing, the army chief of Myanmar, declared that Myanmar has no Rohingyas and will not accept the term. He categorically mentioned that these people are Bengalis. That is the state position. And General Min said that they were sent by the British to the Rakhine state after colonization of the region through the first Anglo-Burmese war that took place, began in 1824. So that continued for some time, but say from 1824, when this colonization took place, then the Bengalis were invited there, and they have lived there. And very interestingly, according to their new citizenship law, they say that anybody who has been living on the territory of Myanmar from or before 1824 they would be recognized as citizens of Myanmar. So the threshold, say, just compare with the threshold agreed between India and Bangladesh. India and Bangladesh agreed that anybody living on the territory from before 1971, that is the cutoff line, would be recognized as the citizen. But the first law, the first citizenship law, though recognized anybody who was living on the territory from before 1940 was recognized as a Myanmar, as a Burmese citizen. At that time it was Burma. But subsequently the military government pushed back the demarcation line to 1824 and says that anybody who has come there after 1824 is a foreigner, a non-citizen. And this was a deliberate attempt to exclude the Rohingyas. In fact, this was a deliberate attempt to exclude the Rohingyas, and that's why this particular provision has been introduced in the citizenship law. Now, Rohingyas speak a language which they call Rohingya. It is an Eastern Indo-Aryan language belonging to Bengali Assamese branch, and it is to many the Chittagonian dialect of the Bangla language, which they speak. But though, recent studies has shown that, it is not totally the Chittagonian dialect. But we have also to understand that they have been living in the state of Arakan, which has been renamed as Rakhine State. They have been living there. If General Minong Lang is correct, then they have been living there from 1824 at least, which goes back to 200 years. So there has been some changes, or rather there has been new elements. New elements have come into their language. So it's a roughly, it differs in estimates, but roughly about, say, 30% of the words, or a little less or more than that, is different. 30 to 35% of the words are different from the Chittagonian Bangla. But the Chittagonian-speaking Bengali people understand the Rohingya language pretty well, and the Rohingyas understand and can speak Chittagonian very well. So, in fact, when we have been working in that area, we also used our Chittagonian research assistants to communicate with them. So definitely there is a historical linkage between the Rohingyas and the Chittagonian people. Historically we cannot deny that, but it doesn't mean that they are citizens. They are Bangladeshis by citizenship. No way, because they have been living there for nearly 200 years, or actually many of them went before that. So, and Bengalis are not the only source, because there are other descendants from other communities also, though it is largely Bengali. So they have developed an identity, they have constructed identity. This has been one of the, again, another allegation that Rohingya is no identity, it is a constructed identity. But all identities are perhaps constructed. So they have been citizens of Myanmar, though they may have had historical origins in Greater Bengal, particularly in southeastern Bengal. But here I should also refer to the issue of historical linkage between Bengal and Myanmar, because these are geographically close areas. Geographical proximity led to politico-cultural ties from ancient times. And in fact, this is very interesting to note that Bangladesh has a Burman population who call themselves in Bangladesh as indigenous people. And interestingly, Bangladesh government recognizes them as an ethnic minority of the country. Yeah, but they call themselves Burman, and their physical features represent the Burmese people. They are Mongoloid. And so Bangladesh has a Burman population. In fact, the Southeast Bengal had a Burman kingdom centering around Moinamoti, the famous historical site and Buddhist learning site, seat of Buddhist education, housing universities in ancient times. So the Southeast Bengal had a Burman kingdom, though it's not very clear whether that was an independent kingdom or was a part of the then Burmese rulers. But at one stage in history, Dhaka was also under Burman rule. So the history of this linkage goes back quite far, actually. And interestingly, on the other hand, Arakani king Min Chua Moon, who ruled between, or rather, who ruled, whose accession took place in 1403 and he died in 1433. So Arakani king Min Chua Moon, he actually got refuge in Bengal for 25 years. He was dethroned and he took refuge in Bengal, stayed here for 25 years. And then Bengal Sultan Jalaluddin Mahmud Shah, he actually helped him militarily, initially, firstly with 20,000 soldiers, and second time with 30,000 soldiers to get back to his throne in 1430. So very interestingly, when Bengal Sultan Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah actually helped the Arakani king Min Chua Moon to get back his throne with 20,000 soldiers, the commander of his army found that he had very little following in Arakan, and then he declared himself as the independent king. Then Sultan and dethroned him. So he came back to Sultan Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah, and Jalaluddin Muhammad Shah this time sent another 30,000 soldiers for his behalf to fight his own army, sent earlier. And he was put to throne in 1430. So Bengal also helped, the Arakani king, and grateful Min Chua Moon actually introduced symbolic points, shifted capital near Bengal border, and adopted a Muslim title called Sulaiman Shah. And this adopting of Muslim title continued for 16 Arakani rulers for 205 years. So this became a tradition and continued, symbolizing the relationship with Bengal. So this historical linkage had other expressions. Arakani kings patronized talented Bengali poets like Daulat Kaji, who lived between 1600 and 1638, and Alaul, who lived between 1607 to 1680. Alaul had a long life. So, but Daulat Kaji and Alaul are very famous in the Bengali literature of the Middle Ages. So they were principally based in Arakan, and Arakani kings patronized them. Arakani king Busaupo occupied, but at a later stage we find that when Bengal became weak, Arakani king Busaupo actually occupied Bengal territories up to Chittagong in 1449. But later in 16, and actually that control continued for more than 100 years. So up to Chittagong, it was Arakan state. But Subedar Shayesta Khan, the celebrated Subedar Shayesta Khan, Mughal Subedar, he actually not only expelled the Arakanis from Bengal territories, but he pushed them up to Arakan and captured Arakan and brought Arakan under Bengal control. So Arakan was, and ultimately, Arakan was annexed to the British Empire finally in 1784. So this has been the history. So what I want to say is that the historical linkage existed between Bengal and Burma, or more particularly the Arakan, now called Rakhine territories. And naturally, in this process, there was, of course, ethno-cultural exchanges or ethno-cultural, ethno-cultural linkages developed between these two territories. However, when Arakan came under British rule through first Anglo-Burmese war that took place between 1824 and 1826, they actually invited Bengalis from adjoining parts, and they wanted to promote plough cultivation in place of slash and burn cultivation for revenue generation. This was a policy propagated by the British colonial rulers in neighboring Chittagong hill tracts and in other hilly areas of this region. So they wanted to promote plough cultivation, and actually Professor Rajshekhar Boshu was also referring to the labor supply and the role of the European farmers and the seasonality of many of the workers that actually used to move from Bengal or from adjoining Cox's Bazar, Chittagong area to the Arakan areas. That has been happening, and this led to the exchanges between the two communities, and this led to, and actually there was a particular requirement of more seasonal works. So that was supplied by the Bengalis. So the social and ethno-cultural exchanges must have taken place there. Now, if we look at the Muslim population of Arakan state, we find there are, interestingly, Rohingyas are only one of the Muslim populations of that particular region. Not whole of Burma speaking, I'm speaking deliberately of the Rakhine state, which is adjoining Bangladesh border. And we find 4 Muslim communities there, Tambukiyas, and they claim that their ancestors came from from Arabia in 8th century. And there is the story of a shipwreck, and they were allowed to settle down in southern Arakan by the then king Mahatime Chandra, who lived between 788 to 810. So Tambukiyas claim their ancestry from Arabia. Now there is another group called Turco-Pathans who live principally in the outskirts of Rohan, the last capital of Arakan, and they claim to be descendants of the members of Bengal army that recaptured the domain of Arakani king Bin. He was also known as Naromekla. And so the soldiers that went from Bengal, they were principally Turco-Pathans, and they settled down there. The 50,000 that went there, initially 20,000 and subsequently 30,000. So there are descendants of them also in the region. And there is a third category called Comanche, whose ancestors came as claimed to the region with Shah Shuja, governor of Bengal, who moved to Arakan with his family after being overthrown by his brother Aurangzeb. So there was Aurangzeb, and he feared for his life from his brother Aurangzeb. And he, along with his family, moved to Myanmar. Not only family, with all his, descendants and soldiers that he had here in Bengal with him as governor. So their descendants they are known as Comanche, and they live mainly in Ramri Island. So the fourth category are the Rohingyas. As we know, mainly descendants from Muslims of the Chittagong region and concentrated in northern Arakan region, not in whole of Arakan, in northern Arakan area. And but the principal problem is with the Rohingyas. Of course, the state, the Burmese state, do not recognize the Tambukiyas or the Turco-Pathans or the Comanches or even the Chinese Muslims in Myanmar, though they have a very good relationship with China, but they don't recognize the Chinese Muslims. So there is an anti-Muslim policy very much at the heart of the Burmese policy. But, they are particularly, against the Rohingya population, which they think came from Bangladesh. But even if that claim is correct, and the linguistic affinity shows that there is some truth in this, of course. But, but that goes back to 200 years. And then it was a part of Indian subcontinent. And anybody could move to any place of the subcontinent at that time. There was no visa and passport for moving within the Indian subcontinent, including Myanmar at that stage. And many of them may have settled down. So the claim on the basis of which they want to, expel them people, it has no basis, no acceptable basis. However, so the situation that has taken place, the atrocities that has been committed on the Rohingya population, that has forced them to migrate to Bangladesh, and now almost 3/4 of the Rohingya population have been expelled from their motherland. Many of them still in Bangladesh. About 2/3 of them still in Bangladesh, but 1/3 of the refugees or expelled population have got place in other parts of the world. So they have dispersed to various parts of the world. Right. But what is the impact of this population transfer is having on Bangladesh? Bangladesh has been very, Bangladesh has been um, very sympathetic to the Rohingya population and has been trying to do all they could do. And the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, has been named as Mother of Humanity by international bodies um, for her role in supporting the Rohingya refugees. But besides being this, it is having, besides this positive approach by the Bangladesh government, the reality on the ground is that it is having a lot of, impact, serious impact on the local population, and not only population, on the environment uh, uh, and relationships of the on environment and on human beings in many terms, including deforestation. Since I have already taken quite some time, I would like to be brief on this part, but I can just mention that destruction of ecological balance in that region has been one major factor. Water resource depletion has been another factor. Land degradation, loss of land, and loss of biodiversity in terms of flora and fauna has been a major problem. And a human and wildlife conflict has been generated. I'll explain these points a bit later. And damages to properties have taken place. And because of this sudden explosion in the population in that particular belt, the prices of commodities, essential commodities, have risen. There was a serious hike in the price of commodities, and it is having impact on the local people, and the cost of living has increased, and as a result, and also there has been added competition in the labor markets, and particularly the Rohingyas, they are entering into the local labor market, and they to get any kind of job at any price. So they are bringing down the the market price of the labors at the locality. So it has given birth to competition in the labor market. And another major problem has been that the Rohingya communities have been amalgamating with the mainstream Bengali communities. Now, as this problem has been going on for a few decades, and the government attempts to repatriate virtually failed. So, so there was for various reasons, the previous governments actually encouraged kind of amalgamation, or rather kind of followed a policy of social inclusion, and actually encouraged them to settle down with the help of the relatives that they may have in this part of the border. And in fact, it is estimated that a good number of them, I'll give specific details just after a while, a very good number of them actually possess Bangladeshi passport. And many of them who now live in Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan or in some other parts of the Middle East or elsewhere, they actually possess Bangladeshi passport, which help them to travel with. So, but not all of them could go. A lot of them simply got amalgamated in this process of social inclusion with the mainstream Bengali communities. And also it is having a very negative impact on the Chittagong Hill Tracts indigenous peoples that I have explained. So this is the outline that I wanted to say you, that how it is affecting the life of the local people in the region. And so if I can just quickly, I'll try to be very brief. I will try to explain some of the impacts on the locality, local environment and local population. So to talk about the environmental impact, I would refer to the UNHCR environmental guidelines that was published in 2005, which, this is from their worldwide experience. They tried to, outline the environmental impacts of refugees in host countries. And it said, if I quote, uncontrolled fuel wood collection, which is happening, and it happens everywhere, perhaps, uncontrolled fuel wood collection, poaching, and overuse of limited water supplies add pressure to the ecosystems in many regions. As I said, from the global experience, including some unique areas set aside by local governments as parks, reserves, or even World Heritage Sites. In the worst case, these activities, if allowed to continue, could result in irreversible losses of productivity, the extinction of plant and animal species, and destruction of unique ecosystems, the depletion or long-term pollution of groundwater supplies, or a variety of other destructive outcomes. So this has been the observations of UNHCR from around the world, and actually all of these are taking place in Bangladesh. So if I say, talk about demographic pressure that has been put on that particular area. So, UNHCR, UN High Commission for Refugees, in 2020, this year, on 30th June, they estimated that 860,356 Rohingya individuals live in Cox's Bazar area. So the UNHCR has estimated their number to be 860,000. 8,60,356 জন Rohingya, they say, live in Cox's Bazar area, which includes, interestingly, only 35,060 registered refugees. The Bangladesh government used to give refugee status before, but government has denied giving them refugee status now. So though we are calling them refugees, but officially there are only 35,060 refugees living in Bangladesh, but others have been denied refugee status, though in reality they are refugees in Bangladesh. But this statistics is not, it does not include the Rohingyas who have merged into the local host communities prior to and between major mass influxes. So this is the figure that has come after after August or from August 25th, 2017, and living in that area. But I can also mention you, some of them have actually crossed the boundaries mentioned by the state for them, and they have gone into other districts. So, and there have been, major influxes from 1978. So this figure, 860,356, doesn't include the Rohingyas who have marched into the local communities before. So you can understand what has been the number. And it also does not include the Rohingyas who live in other districts. Particularly, I was referring to Chittagong hill tracts, namely Bandarban, Rangamati, Khagrachodi, and a good number of them live in. So the number, the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics actually, estimated that before the influx of August 2017, before that 303,070 Rohingyas, 303,000. 3,03,070 জন Rohingya refugees were living in Bangladesh before the influx began in August 2017. So definitely, so according to the official estimates of Bangladesh government, then stands at 860,000 plus 303,000 means 1,163,000, about 400 plus refugees are now, Rohingya refugees are living in Bangladesh, and it is not a complete figure. So you can understand the kind of demographic pressure that has been created on Bangladesh, and particularly on the locality where the camps are located in Cox's Bazar district. Cox's Bazar has the longest sea beach in the world, and it has been the most important tourist spot in Bangladesh. But in some part of the district, Ukia and Teknath sub-districts of Cox's Bazar, the Rohingyas have outnumbered the local population by 2 to 1, at least by 2 to 1. So that has been the kind of demographic pressure that has been created on the locality. And again, if I talk about improper land occupation, the government has actually initially allocated 6,340 acres of land for them, and subsequently allocated another 2,000 acres. So about 8,000 plus acres of land were allocated for housing them, the Rohingya refugees. But Rohingyas have built shelters beyond that, and they have violated existing environmental rules and laws of the host country. And shelters have taken over nearby hills and surrounding plains, forests. So they have taken over nearby hills, forests, and plains. And that has affected rubber gardens, khas lands or government-owned lands, as well as fallow or crop lands of the local people. So that has created some tension between the Rohingya refugees and the local people when they began to encroach into local people's lands. So this has begun to complicate the situation. And also, the hills have now been stripped naked and leveled to the ground in order to build thousands of temporary shelters. This is also another feature. The Bengali people whom they erect their houses, they tend to, since they live in plainlands, they tend to level the hilly areas, and then they build the house or camp. But if the persons are from an ethnic background, they build their houses on poles, maybe bamboo poles or other poles, trees, wood poles, and they make their houses in a different way so that they harm the land minimum possible. So, the way the Rohingyas are building their houses or camps, they have been leveling them to the grounds in many cases, and that has stripped the hills naked, or they have deforested the areas. But this is on the one side happening. On the other side, we must also look at the Rohingya situation, because the Rohingya space that has been allocated to them, 8,500 something acres. This is actually too little for housing such a huge number of population. So space allocated to them is insufficient. It is a reality, and it is forcing them to survive in an inhuman living condition in cramped and overcrowded spaces. This is a reality. So, problems on both sides. And also the existence of the situation of the Rohingyas are, contaminating the water resources, and groundwater sources of affected areas are quickly being depleted, and freshwater streams have been contaminated. And World Health Organization (WHO) has estimated that 62% of the water available to Rohingya households are contaminated. So their survey has found out that World Health Organization have found out that 62% of the Rohingyas are actually drinking contaminated water. And we can understand the kind of health consequences it may create. And again, camps are, having a very improper waste management system. Those people have come across fearing their lives, and very unfortunately, in Myanmar state, they have been the most neglected, mostly uneducated, or some of them went to some maktabs or Islamic institutions, learning Arabic, learning to read Quran, that kind of schools. And one of the findings is that they were not, acquainted with the term of family planning. This has been, one of the findings by the Bangladesh Health Ministry, that the Rohingyas were, when they came, they were completely unaware of contraception, use of contraception. So, so these uneducated people basically, in fact, there in last couple of decades, there has been some educated youths have emerged from among the Rohingya communities, but they are basically the youth who grew up in other countries where they got access to education. So we now find a few lawyers and a few others from among the Rohingyas, but those were new generation Rohingyas whose parents migrated to outside world, or maybe in Bangladesh in late 70s or early 80s or 90s, and they got education somehow through mainstreaming process. And they have some educated, others are basically non-educated. So when you talk about waste management, this is, there are compulsions and there are lack of awareness also. Common materials used in building makeshift shelters use harmful materials like tarpaulin and aluminium, and also a lot of plastic materials are used, but those again go to block the drainage system. And one of the studies by Reid have found out that a single outdoor latrine is used by up to 20 people in the camps. So this is the situation. And also deforestation. One of the leading English newspapers of Bangladesh New had estimated in 2018, they estimated that deforestation due to Rohingya camps was worth 86.67 million US dollars in 2018. So, so there are several estimates by the Ministry of Forest also. There has been estimates of the impact that is having environmentally. Impact, quantified in terms of money due to environmental loss. In fact, UNHCR in 2018 have come out with a study, and that says that 80% of the fuel used in the Rohingya camps come from tree cutting. So you can imagine when, say, 1 million plus people use 80% on the meet their 80% of their fuel needs by tree cutting from the neighboring areas, what kind of impact it may have on the area. So there are, I can go on like this. I have a lot of other information on, impact of construction work and many other points. So air pollution is another area which is, there has been some studies, and one doctor called Dr. Abdul Salam, a surgeon from Cox's Bazar, he says that indoor air pollution can affect health. And here in the camps, people are highly dependent on inefficient stoves. And smoke from high road is increasing health risk. Respiratory infections, breathing problems are common among the camp's residents. So this increase of greenhouse gas emissions caused by deforestation will have, long-term impact, and the loss of biodiversity has. And one of the interesting thing is that, the major camp, Kutupalong, has been, erected in a place which fall on the path through which the Asian elephants used to cross. So this has actually blocked the way all on a sudden, and that camp houses 600,000 people, the largest camp in the world. So that now houses 600,000 people. So that was the path which was used by the elephants, and now it is affecting their passage. So, and these elephants have been categorized by International Union of Conservation of Nature, IUCN, as critically endangered species. So it is having also a negative impact on their existence. Security is another problem. Okay. And the local host communities, I have referred to that, and particularly they are having serious impact in terms of damage to properties, price hike of communities, increased of cost of living. And it is actually bringing them in a confronting situation. And that's why, the Bangladesh government and the NGOs have been urging the donors to actually support the local host communities as well, beside the Rohingyas. Otherwise, this conflict would, or could reach to a stage where it might outbreak in serious, hostilities. So that is one side. The other side is that, Bangladesh government has now banned marriage between the Rohingyas and Bengali communities. And after this declaration, fraud and forgery has become more popular ways to get access, because one of the means was to get passports through marital relationships. Now, in fact, in 2010 Election Commission of Bangladesh scrutinized the draft voter lists in sub-districts of Cox's Bazar and identified 45,866 false voters. Or the Rohingya voters in the list in 2010. And in the year before, in 2009, there were more than there were approximately 100,000 Rohingyas who illegally tried to enter into the draft voter list in Bangladesh. And one of my last points would be that it is having a very serious impact on the Chittagong Hill Tracts indigenous peoples, because the Rohingyas are originally Bengalis and they are Muslims. So the previous governments who used to follow a policy of Islamization, Bengalization and Islamization in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, under a policy of outnumbering the indigenous peoples. They have been actually encouraging the Rohingyas to enter into Chittagong Hill Tracts, join the settlers who were sponsored by previous military governments of General Zia and General Irshad, and would join and encourage them to join this process of outnumbering the indigenous people in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. So Chittagong Hill Tracts is a complicated zone where the state, since independence, have been following a very negative policy, there was attempt to correct the wrong by way of signing the peace accord in 1997 by then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. But even after 23 years, the accord had not been implemented in its full, and it has virtually been stalled. So in that situation, CHT, there is a high risk of escalation, CHT entering into a escalated status of violence. So the entering of the Rohingyas, allies Bengali Muslims, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts areas is creating a new problem. And not only in areas adjoining to Cox's Bazar district, the Chittagong Hill Tracts local sub-district is called Naikhanchori, and there the Upazila chairman, the elected representatives of the local bodies are all Rohingyas who settled there in 70s or early 80s or subsequently. In fact, one of the major leader of that area is the son of the Supreme Commander of RSO, Rohingya Solidarity Organization, and he was also the leader of Rohingya Solidarity Army. His son is the chairman in that area. So, and in that area, 80% of the population is now Rohingyas of that sub-district. So the indigenous people have become marginalized to that extent in that sub-district. But the Rohingyas are being found everywhere, wherever, even if as far as Khagrachuri or in remote sub-district of Baghaichori of Khagrachuri, which is very far from there, because Chittagong Hill Tracts comprises 1/10 of Bangladesh. So even in as far areas as Baghaichori or Khagrachuri, in recent conflict between Bengali settlers and Adivashis, it has been found that the Rohingyas have been playing an important role. And Rohingyas have been identified as, instrumental in attacking the Buddhist, installation that took place a few years ago in one of the sub-districts, Ramu, of Cox's Bazar. In fact, a good number of Buddhists, not only Buddhist, pagodas were attacked, and which contained manuscripts from at least 500 years back. Some dated back to even more, because people believe that is an area which has been Buddhist from very old times, and even Gautam Buddha had actually visited one of the pagodas of that area. So that has been a Buddhist area from very long past, and almost all the pagodas of that area were attacked by the fanatics, Islamic fanatics, and the Rohingyas played an important role in that attack. So this has been, complicating the situation, local situation. So unless the Rohingyas are sent back immediately to their own country, then this situation in Bangladesh would deteriorate. And the relationship, the warmth of the relationship that with which the Bengali local population actually accepted them is beginning to wind up. If not wind up, it is reducing. Yeah. So the local people are feeling threatened, and many of them are fearing both Adivashis and Bengalis as well as the old Bengalis. They are feeling threatened about their own existence in their own area because they have become minority in that area. So that has been a major problem. And also the law and order situation in the Rohingya camps is also a matter of challenge. And a good number of murders have taken place from their internal feuds in the local camps. And there are reports of sex trade and several other drug trafficking in the camps, and with the involvement of the Rohingyas in the camps. That has been widely reported in the country. So all this situation is leading to a place where these people, unless return to their own homeland quickly and very quickly, this may deteriorate the situation in the locality. And now this repatriation. I mean, repatriation, there are also thoughts that the repatriation may not always have to be. I mean, of course, they have a right to go back to their own country. And as rightly put, very rightly put, that they must be given, citizenship, full and equal citizenship in Myanmar. That's their motherland, that's their home country, and they must get equal citizenship, and they must, their security must be ensured by the world community. If not, then why should they go back? And they cannot be sent back. But, Bangladesh has been trying to repatriate them from late 1970s, but have failed. So in that situation, the world community must come forward, and they must ensure that the Myanmar follows the rules of the civilized world, or face the music. So that's one thing. And another thing is that why Bangladesh should bear the burden alone. Yeah, if world community cannot resolve this problem, then the Rohingya communities may be relocated in other parts of the world. Yeah, they can be relocated in USA, maybe in some other parts of the world where there are lots of spaces, where they can be, or they have resources to support them. So both the options can be kept open. It is the responsibility of the world to ensure that they can go back to their own land with dignity and safety, but also, uh, until that can be ensured, the burden can be shared by the world community. And in this process, Bangladesh expects support of India, in mobilizing the world opinion. Particularly in this case, China has been, almost always supportive of the Myanmar's military government, meaning the support, they have been supporting in a way the expulsion policy of the government. And there have been reports of, China building export processing zones and others in the Rakhine land, in the areas from where Rakhines have been, ousted. So, the Chinese policy has been very difficult. And in this situation, India being a friend of Bangladesh from 1971, when Bangladesh needed a friend most, India stood by Bangladesh. And Bangladesh expects India to come forward and support Bangladesh. Bangladesh is extending all it can do to support the Rohingyas, but it cannot do for unlimited time. And there is also a fear that, the support that Bangladesh is getting from the world community to feed this 1.1 million Rohingya refugees. Others have already been incorporated into the Bangladesh body. But, those who can still be identified, but there is a fear that the support that is coming may dry up in near future. And because there will be new crisis in other parts of the world, and the world community will be forced to, take care of that. And that may draw their attention beyond the Rohingyas. Then who will bear the burden of the Rohingyas? And that will, Bangladesh has been trying to achieve some milestones, but its economy is still, very moderate. So So, Bangladesh has just begun to enter into the first level of the middle income group. It had just crossed the, developing stage. Yeah. So Bangladesh itself needs support. So in this time, the best way to support this is to politically resolve this problem. As Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has mentioned, that this is a problem of Myanmar. This is not a problem of Bangladesh. Myanmar must ensure citizenship rights to all their citizens. So, the Myanmar government must be, pressurized or compelled to ensure the safety and security and citizenship rights of all its citizens, including the Rohingyas. And Bangladesh should get rid of this problem as quick as possible. Bangladesh doing its best. Bangladesh has been very human. Bangladesh has been very supportive, but there is a limit to everything. When India is, extending, India has given refuge to only 40,000. India being such a massive country geographically, India has given refuge to only 40,000. And India also has direct borders with Myanmar. Bangladesh has a very little border with Myanmar. Why should Bangladesh be this 1.1 million people for an indefinite period of time? And it's not only from 2017. It started from 1978 on. The world failed to recognize the problem. But, in 2017, they were forced to open their eyes. Now that the eyes of the world have been opened to this problem, it should take adequate measures. And Bangladesh wants India to be beside Bangladesh in this process. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your elaborative, informative, and well-framed lecture you have given today. We are enlightened, and definitely the opportunity will come in future to have you in such type of seminars. Before we go for vote of thanks, here is an important announcement. Our international webinar series now extended. Our next webinar is on 8th of November. Two foreign eminent speakers will be speaking on that occasion. So your participation is highly solicited. Now I would like to request Dr. Aravinda Shah, Assistant Professor in the Department of Food and Nutrition, Raidighi College, to deliver vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Shah. A very good evening to all of you and two eminent speakers we have amongst us. I am honored that I have the opportunity to propose the vote of thanks for today's fourth international webinar on society, economy, polity, culture, colonial and post-colonial South Asia, and today being the fourth topic on revisiting Bengal and its frontiers. We are privileged and highly honored that we have amongst us two great historians of international repute. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I am privileged to extend to our first speaker, Professor of History, University of Calcutta, Dr. Rajshekhar Basu, for accepting our invitation and enlightening us with his lucid and informative lecture. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us from such a long time. At the same time, we are highly grateful to our second speaker, also a historian, Professor of History, University of Dhaka, Dr. Misbah Kamal, for gracing this event, giving his precious time and such insightful, detailed lecture on today's topic. We all must have gained a lot from both the lecture. Thank you so much, sir. I extend profound gratitude to our respected principal, sir, Dr. Shashubindu Jana Mahashay, for his constant support and guidance from the very beginning of this international web series lecture. I would also like to thank our Teacher Council Secretary, Assistant Professor, Head of the Department, History, Dr. Shudhin Sinha, for extending his guidance and support. At the same time, we are grateful to Academic Council Secretary, Sri Sanat Kumar Purkai, for his support and guidance. Special thanks to the convener of this webinar series, Dr. Jahan Ali Purkai, Assistant Professor, Department of History, for his sincere efforts to organize this web series and encouraging his colleagues by actively participating in all the series in different ways. Thank you so much. A heartfelt thanks to all the organizing committee members and faculty members of Department of History, Srimati Sharbani Haldar Madam, Begum Nazia Sultana Madam, Sri Ramesh Chandra Das and Sri Himanshu Shekhar Das for their support and cooperation. I extend our heartfelt thanks to the Internal Quality Assurance Cell Coordinator Dr. Shishir Chatterjee and Joint Coordinator Dr. Aruna Vishwas for their guidance and support. At the same time, we are grateful to the members of Encouragement and Support Team, including Dr. Shishir Chatterjee, Dr. Manav Kanti Boidyo, Dr. Arunima Visyas, Professor Sanat Kumar Purkai, Dr. Hamid Iqbal, Sri Sheetal Singh, Srimati Shobita Soren, Mr. Hamidur Rahman, and Mr. Zakir Hossain for their constant support, encouragement, and cooperation. My heartfelt thanks to my dear colleague, Head and Assistant Professor, Department of Food and Nutrition, Ukshana Irani, for her warm welcome address. A special thanks to the coordinator and enthusiastic host of today's webinar, Professor Vidyut Shah, for conducting this webinar series so well. Thank you so much, sir. I also thank Madam Shabita Soren, who introduced the speakers of international repute to our participants. We are also grateful to all the teaching and non-teaching staffs of Raidighi College who have directly or indirectly cooperated or involved in smooth sailing of this webinar series deserve a round of applause. I thank all the participants who have been patiently listening to the webinar lectures from the starting. I would also like to extend my thanks to our college colleagues who have been there from the starting of the webinar, and Dr. Shakuntala Gharai, who is also there amongst us. With that, we come to the end of today's international webinar series, and my sincere apologies if I have missed out on anyone. So over to you, Dr. Jahan Ali Purkai, if you want to say anything.
Jahan, could you listen to? Jahan, could you hear me?
Yes,
I think
yes, I'm hearing.
Oh, yes. Have you any words?
Hello.
Have you any words?
This is a technical problem that is evident here.
Anyways, as we are now on the very end of our program today, so we thanks all the participants from different colleges, universities from the country and abroad. We declare the session is over.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm